Here we go. Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad that you're here. It's 8 o'clock on Wednesday, and I am really, really pleased to be able to have Ned Johnson with me. He is the co author of, let me see, I'm very bad at doing this, The Self Driven Child. Whoops, see,
Woohoo.
The Self Driven Child. And he has a new book coming out. Oh, here we go. Much better. Oh, yes, you do that better than I do. Thank you. You seem to have experience. And of the upcoming What Do You Say? How to Talk with Kids to Build Stress Tolerance, Motivation, and a Happy Home. So, thank you so much for joining me. Folks, if you have comments, put them up. I'm trying to monitor those from my screen here. But go ahead and ask us some questions. So, Ned, tell me about the new book. Writing one book is a big accomplishment. What made you decide that you needed to write a second one?
Well, thank you, thank you. So the self-driven child really has at its core the value of giving kids a greater sense of control over their own lives. In part because Bill is a clinical neuropsychologist, and my work working perennially with really juniors in high school. We're concerned by what looked like sort of two almost pandemics, epidemics of stress-related disorders in kids of anxiety and depression, and what felt to us like disordered motivation of either kids who are sort of obsessively driven, perfectionistic, take no prisoners, or kids who are like, what's the point? If I can't be a top student, why even bother? And what we know and the more we looked at this, the more that we can help kids have a kind of a sense of control over their own lives. They're not helpless, they're not hopeless, they're not powerless. The better they can handle the natural stresses of life, and the more motivated they can be. But as we were kind of all across the country talking about this, one of the things that came up over and over was people that, the science made sense to them. They liked the stories. And we had some language in the first book, but often they're like, yeah, but what do I say? Whatever. I always feel like I say the wrong thing. Like, can you kind of give us the words, almost the scripts for how to handle some of these situations that all of us as parents and educators face? And so that's really where we came at. That's really the reason that we decided to write this book.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that that's really helpful because even when you understand what to do, knowing what to do, and of course, in the moment with your teenagers, it can be really hard to know what you're going to say, and then walk away from the situation and just think to yourself, "Oh, now I know what I should
Well,
have."
I think that's right. And I have a son who's 19 years old, is about to start a second year of college, and a daughter who's 17, who's entering her senior year of high school. And it's really hard for us as parents, anyone, but as parents especially, to know that we have really good advice, to feel that we have wisdom, to want to be able to help our kids. And the what might be spot on, but maybe because the how isn't quite right, this
Mm.
great advice we have gets thrown back in our face, and you just don't understand, or why would I do that? And when we can feel like our kids are resisting what might be in their own best interest, and they're frustrated with us for being on top of them, and we're frustrated with them for not listening. And in our experience, if the communication is effective, so people can feel heard and they can feel understood, then we're working together. Our kids don't feel like we're working on them. If we have the experience of working with them, which is really what we all want to be. We want to feel helpful, and our kids want to feel like when they need help, that we're right there with them, and they can come to us, and we're not going to. It's not going to be a fight, but we're going to figure this thing out together.
Yeah, I really love what you said in this book about the parent as consultant. So could
Yeah,
you speak a little
yeah.
bit to
Well, yeah. So this first came up this is in the Self-Driven Child, the chapter 4 of it, and it's the idea that things go better if we think of ourselves as consultants to our kids rather than their managers or their boss or their homework police, because people they don't like to be told what to do. But we're also not suggesting that parents are like total laissez-faire, like, yeah, do it, it's all on you, and just step away. It's not stepping away from our kids. It's just that we're not behind them, pushing them. We're in front of them, dragging them up a hill. We're more
that?
sort of there with them. And if you think about the model of a business consultant, right? You come into my company. You don't know my company as well as I do, but you can sit there and look and observe, and you can reflect back and say, no, well, it looks to me like this. Do I have this about right? It seems like this is going really well, but this is kind of a challenge. I have a couple thoughts on this. Is it okay if I run by you? People, nobody likes a middle manager, right? Telling you what to do, right? But a consultant, who has the benefit of experience, of wisdom, of, working with other companies, or in this case as parents, our own lives, our own experiences, we want to be effective in sharing our advice and sharing our wisdom with kids. And so this idea is that we don't, sort of kind of three ideas behind this parent as consultant. One, you don't force help on kids. You don't force advice on kids, in part because it just makes them mad and we get frustrated. And then again, they reject what might be really good advice just because they're mad, right? So we seek buy-in, right? I got a thought on that, right? In my experience, I had an idea that worked pretty well for me. Do you want to hear it? Now, of course, occasionally kids will say no, and then you have no choice then but to shove it down their throats, because that's, excuse me, don't end it.
Don't do that.
We also want to, as consultants, we want to let kids, as much as they can, make their own decisions, unless they're crazy, meaning most people think that is a terrible idea, in part because we develop all those executive functions, right, the prefrontal cortex, by debating the pros and cons, the back and forth. And we want kids to have as much experience as they can, making decisions for themselves. And when they make bad decisions, figuring out what's the next step, what's the plan B, we want them to have that experience with our help, but making those choices themselves before they go off to college with, honest to gosh, suitcases full of our money. Because if they've only been successful based on our telling what to do all the time,
right?
We had an article in the New York Times, I guess 2 Thanksgivings ago, and it was about the 8 kids we knew who were home in their first year of college to stay. They'd already washed out of college. And almost all of these kids, they simply had not yet had enough experience running their own lives. And we need kids to have that experience, again, with our advice, with our support, but not our running the show. And the last thing is that so offer help, offer advice, let kids make their own decisions, and then as much as possible, let kids fix their own problems. And this is hard, because when your kid is having a hard time, when your kid is screwing up, you think you're never going to get into college, whatever. It's hard not to want to jump in there and solve things for kids. But from a neurological perspective, we talk about this in the self-driven child. The single best marker of mental health is how strong are the connections between the prefrontal cortex, right, the executive function part of the brain, and the stress detecting amygdala. And we really develop those connections by being in situations that are hard, that are challenging, that are taxing, that are stressful, and figuring out a way to get through this, even if it's suboptimal, but getting through it. That's what wires brains. That's what resilience looks like, is the ability to deal with something and come back to the prior state. And so this idea of being a consultant, it's not easy, principally because it means that we as parents are being less controlling, and that's a little more stressful for us. In the book, What Do You Say? There's a wonderful researcher named Jessie Borelli out of UC Irvine, terrific stuff, and she's a researcher on overparenting. So this is great. So the story in the book, she has kids, so they're 12, 13-year-old kids, and their mom there, and the kids are tasked with trying to solve some kind of digital puzzle. And the moms are there for moral support, and the only instruction is don't tell them what to do. You can be there, so, sweetheart, you're doing great. I'm sure you'll get this. Take your time. Take a deep breath, but don't tell them. And the puzzle looks easy, and of course, it's not. And then the kids get frustrated and they get distressed, and mom's looking at the shoulder and blah, blah, blah. And when they start to get worked up, it's hard on their moms, and their moms have a hard time. And they all jump. Move it to the left. Did you turn it this? What if you do it this way, right? But here's the kicker. Mom and the kid both have heart rate monitors. And when the moms finally kind of can't take it anymore and jump in and start giving instructions, they feel so much better, because they don't feel a low sense of control. And their heart rates and their stress goes down as their kids goes up. So
complicated,
to do this, it's hard, and we're honest about that. And that's part of the reason we talk so much about language in this book. Is that effective language that helps even us as parents feel understood and feel listened to, even as we're sitting there biting our tongues going, this might be a disaster. it works better because we're not putting more stress in the system, and we're not depriving kids of the really important experiences they need of making decisions for themselves and solving problems before they head off to college.
So, in response to the part of what you were just saying, and you and I had a discussion about this, and actually it just brings in Jessica Leahy and the gift of failure. A parent has said, "Are you saying let them fail?"
It depends how you describe failure, right? So, we're wired as parents, right? We're wired as mammals to protect our kids, right? And so if we feel like things that are going to be irreparable, and this doesn't mean you don't get into Harvard, Princeton, or Yale. I'm a test prep guy. Let's be honest. I've spent 30 years helping people get into colleges and highly selective colleges, blah, blah, blah. But if you think that it's something, where you simply couldn't live with yourself if the kid put himself or herself in some terrible, terrible peril. But the idea that it's our job to somehow protect our kids from every little problem is just, it's born out of love. It's born out of concern.
Yeah, of course.
It's just not where we want to be. It was funny. I was being interviewed the other day, and I was asked the question, is it hard for you as a parenting expert, and I would say alleged parenting expert, to basically to not rescue your kids too much, right?
Sure.
And all of us feel like we are judged as being good or bad parents based on how well our kids are doing, right? And so look, I'm a guy who helps kids get into college, right? And I've co-written a couple books about this. So yeah, my self-consciousness about how do other people perceive me based on how my kids are doing, I feel that too. But I also know that my kids' struggles are my kids' struggles.
Yeah.
And I do terrible disservice to them if I take away those things that really allow them to find their own strength, to test the limits of their own abilities. When they need help, to learn to ask for help rather than having me sweep in and help them. So I'll tell you this. So my son, you'll love this story, I hope. So my son is 19 years old. 4 weeks ago, Elizabeth, I was doing I was recording the audio for our new book, What Do You Say? And my son had been having these migraines, and on. And there's some history of migraines in my wife's side of the family, but I hadn't talked to him about this. And so I get out of the studio, first day of 4 to 4 days, call my wife up. And so I was just talking with Matthew. Let me see if I can call him up. So we get a three-way. He's a camp counselor. Get a three-way. We're talking, how much ibuprofen is too much. He drops a word. Interesting. I try to listen closely. He drops another word, garbles it. Interesting. A few sentences later, it's gibberish. I think he's having a stroke. Okay. Now I've done enough emergency medicine to be like, okay, this is okay. Matthew, can you hold on a second? Vanessa, don't hang up. Do me a favor, call me on the line. Well, fast forward, my kid has a brain tumor. He has a brain tumor. Now, fortunately, he's a well-mannered kid. He's chosen, if you're going to have a brain tumor, he's chosen the right kind. So the outcomes look pretty good. The statistics are all on our side. So that's awesome. But he said the darndest thing to me. He said, I've often thought that I've been born with such privilege. My parents are educated. We have stable jobs. We have enough money for the things we need. I go to a really good school. I've gotten to the college I want, blah, blah, blah. And I always wondered, am I going to have a challenge that I'm really going to have to struggle with? I would not have. Brain tumor would not have been at the top of that list if we're really honest with ourselves. But Tina Payne Bryson makes this point that the recipe for resilience is adversity plus support. Adversity plus support, not adversity plus saving, right? And I know that I'm sure if you had the wonderful conversation with Jess Leahy, she talks about Steve Mayer and the two rats, right? And the rats that are yoked, right? Yeah. And if rat A can spin the wheel and stop the shock, he becomes the most resilient rat you've ever seen. Rat B, who can't, if he spins the wheel and it doesn't work, he's a disaster. But also, when they yoked the two rats and rat A spins the wheel and he saves himself and he saves brother rat B, I'm sure brother rat B is like, thank you, brother rat A, it's all get out. But he also, even being saved from this stressor, he becomes a basket case because he is forever the damsel in distress. He's never the superhero. He never saves himself in his own story. So,
Mm.
is it hard for me to watch my kids struggle? Yeah, it's hard because I love them. I love them enormously, right? But I don't want to. I don't want to fix things for them that they can solve for themselves. So yeah, that might involve failure.
So, and somebody says they love the idea of adversity plus support. So, I'm seeing some comments. People who know my work often have students who have a learning disability or ADHD. And, when we talk about the experience of watching them struggle, I think so often parents have, by the time their student is identified as having a learning disability or ADHD, they've watched them struggle. They've watched them sometimes have failure experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it can be really challenging to know, the research shows that students who have supportive families tend to be successful at college. That's also true for
Mm-hmm.
students with
Mm-hmm.
disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
So finding that line of rescuing versus supporting, I think.
Right. And to be complete, and I'm really glad you asked that. It's a really good point. And again, we're not talking about stepping away and not giving kids support that they want. We're just talking about not giving support that they've been really clear that they don't want. As a consultant, if I hire you to help me, I will take all the help that I want from you that I think that I need. But it's just so valuable for kids to not have support forced on them, and over time to put them in the position where they seek out help, because that's a really important life skill, not to think that someone's there at the ready, so we make ourselves available. And so the story that's in the self-driven child, my son, when he was, I think this is maybe 6th grade, and he has ADHD. He's the dreamiest kid in the world. I mean, I can tell all that. I mean, it's crazy. He can, like, in a heartbeat, be off in space, and I couldn't be more darling. But still, that's not super helpful all the time, because you miss the homework, you miss the instructions. So my wife, who's a Latin teacher and a really good academic, this is the story that's in the self-driven child. She's helping him with something, and there's an assignment that's not been done, not been written down, not been handed. I don't remember what. And my wife said something like, "Well, why didn't you hand it in?" or something like this. And if we're honest, questions like those are really accusations with a question mark at the end. They're not really in the spirit of inquiry, but more inquisitorialness. And so he responds in kind of, "Well, because you didn't remind me." And I'm like, "Oh, golly." So I'm making dinner, right? And so I kind of lean over to him like, "Well, we don't throw mom under the bus. Right?" And I go over to her and I said, "Sweetheart, obviously that's my fault. That's my side of the family. I'm sure you people are much more well-mannered than that. But honest to gosh, I can kind of understand why he feels that way, because you always do, right? I mean, she has executive functions to the nth degree, so she can run her schedule, my son's schedule, my daughter's schedule. Elizabeth, if you need some help, we can outsource her very reasonable rates. It's just incredible how well she can do it. But obviously, as a 40-something-year-old woman, she doesn't have the brain of a 12-year-old boy. And so we really made the effort to step back, and he rewarded us by doing things like getting a 52 on a history test, because so I might have studied the wrong chapter, kind of thing, right? But we really, really, really walk this walk. And particularly if you have kids who are not yet in high school, let it be a mess, right? But be there to help. And every single night, do you have a plan for your homework? Yeah, I do. Do you want us to look at it? No, I got it. Is there anything you'd like us to help you study with? No, I've got it. Any help we can do at all? No. Okay. Will you let us know if you want help? I'll let you know. And that's what we walked for the next 7 years. And now when he's a first year of college, sometimes he'll reach out, "Could you look at this for me? Because I'm not sure this makes sense." And that's what we want to be. We want to be there to help people who want our help.
I think that's really hard, and I'm seeing some questions. I do want to, let me scroll back to, this is the first one that came in, which was when you have a very anxious and perhaps depressed recent high school grad, and he made a conscious decision to avoid being a top student, and maybe that's tied to the anxiety. how do you help a student, feel that motivation? I think he's taking a year off, and
Mhm.
I think kids are sometimes exhausted. Certainly, the last year
Right,
has
right,
been
right.
exhausting for everybody. But again, and I think we talked about this separately. I think for parents, and I'm very empathetic to this. It's a sense of fear. What if they don't? You said, oh, forget about not just going to Harvard, but
Yeah, yeah.
what if they graduate from high school and they're not ready for college yet, or they're not engaged with it, they're not motivated by it, and then they never, obviously some people do find jobs that they like and they're really interested in, but sometimes when you're 18 you don't know what that job is and you don't know what you want to do, and maybe you're depressed and maybe you're also
Mhm.
anxious.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Well,
sorry,
I mean,
that's a
so I
very
mean,
layered
there's
question.
it's a really good question. There's a lot in there.
Yeah.
Please circle back for the points that I missed. To begin with, I'm not a psychologist, right?
Mhm.
And so, if you have a kid who's depressed or you suspect is depressed, you really want to make sure that they're getting really good therapeutic help, because by definition, if you have a full-on anxiety disorder, or if you're depressed, your thinking is disordered, right? And so you're not able. And so if you have a kid who's hopelessly addicted to drugs, or is clinically depressed, those are things when it can be appropriate to have a power play, because their thinking is not rational, right? But
Mm-hmm.
in terms of, particularly right now, I mean, 30% of kids, or 35% of kids, are going to have an anxiety disorder at some point in high school, and anxiety and depression are certainly much more prevalent than we would want them to be. So this isn't to supplant at all proper therapeutic help, but it's very common for people to have bouts of anxiety. It's very common, sadly, for kids to have bouts of depression. And for us as parents, I think all of our fears, if we really stop and pause, our fears are really not about the present; they're about the future, right? My kid getting a 52 on a history test, like honestly, who cares? I mean, if there's a historian out here, I apologize for dismissing your hard-worn erudition, but honestly, it doesn't matter. What we worry is that my kid's going to have a 52 life, right? He's never going to go to college. He's going to be failing at lunch. He's not going to get a job. He's not going to have the life of success and happiness that I want for him, right? And so one of the things we talk about in both books is this idea of being a non-anxious presence.
Yes,
And
yes.
there are a couple parts.
Trickle down anxiety, you
Yeah,
call it.
yeah. And so we wish we'd made this term up. We borrowed this from a guy named Edwin Freeman, who was a rabbi. He was a consultant. He worked with schools and churches and synagogues and corporations. And he simply made the point that things go better when the the person or people who are in charge aren't overly emotional. They aren't overreactive, right? And when things happen, they go, huh. And I'll sidebar. I'll say that this thing with going through with my son, the thing that's happened over and over and over are people are like, you and Vanessa, or Vanessa, you and Ned, you're so calm about this. Like, how is that? And some of that's a little bit genetic. Some of it's the fact that we both practice transcendental meditation. Some of it's that we really prioritize sleep. We have a healthy relationship. We're not financially insecure. There's a lot to that. But it's also been an incredibly conscious thing on my behalf when things aren't going well to have confidence that they're going to go well eventually. So I'll pivot to my daughter, who's again a senior in high school. So she was full school refusal for the last 3 months of eighth grade. She had no friends for all of seventh and eighth grade. It was hard. It was hard. So I'm a guy who wants to get into college, right? And she pieces out in the last 3 months of eighth grade, what's my inner monologue, right? And she was just having a hard time. And I remember distinctly, she and I went out for a walk. And I put my arm around her. I had her hand in mine. I can't remember what. And I looked at her, and tears were coming down my face. And I said, look, you're going to have a great life. You're funny and you're kind. You're smart as a whip. And you're going to have tons of friends. You're going to find really cool ways to contribute to this world. And she's like, sure doesn't feel that way. And I said, I know it doesn't. I know it doesn't. But I have every confidence. And for once, I don't like to do this power play, but I like to just say, for once, trust me because I'm older. And I've walked through this. And part of it is that I spent 3 months of seventh grade in a pediatric psychiatric hospital, alcoholic father, mentally ill mom, a lot going on. But here's the deal. Even with that, and with my daughter and anyone who has a kid who's having a hard time, it's a pretty solid idea to do three things. One, to believe that they have a brain in their heads and they want their lives to work out. Now, tomorrow may suck, and next week might be terrible, and the next month or the next year might be really hard. But it's much easier for kids to believe that this is going to work out if we as parents can somehow come up with a reason to convince ourselves that this is going to work out. Now, it's easier for me because I went through this nonsense and have a life and I have a life that I want. The second thing would be really just to add on to that, to take the long view. And Bill and I have the huge advantage of having worked with kids, for him for 35 years, me for 30, and seeing kids who are just a disaster. And years later, we were given a talk at a local independent school, and this mom raised her hand, and she said, my son, there's a school in DC called the Lab School, which is for kids with language-based learning disabilities.
Yeah.
And she said, my son was the most learning disabled kid at the school for the most learning disabled kids in the city. I didn't think any every single class he struggled more than any kid in every single class that he had. He is now kills me. He's now a junior at the University of Maryland studying, I don't even remember what. And she said, and so Bill always gets this email. We get these Christmas cards holiday cards from people saying, you were right. They all turned out fine. They all turned out fine. And part of it is if we hold to those ideas, it's easier to put the energy into it. And it's easier for our kids to feel that it's okay if they struggle now because we have confidence that it's going to go better later. And then the last thing, this is a small thing, but an easy thing, I think, is that when our kids are having a hard time, we feel like we're almost neglectful if we don't suffer as much as they do. And I'm just not convinced that that helps. And what I would suggest is to try to pour energy into just treating your kid like they're a joy-creating organism, like they're just the coolest thing on the planet. Even though this might be a mess, that's a disaster. They flunked this. Oh my gosh! And just think, you're just the greatest kid. Because we can change that energy in ways that kids can then change their circumstances. Well, our natural tendency is to want to change the circumstances in ways that can often be hard and counterproductive.
Yeah, and for those of you who are following who have not read the book that's out yet, and the new one's out next Tuesday, so you can both start reading the current book and pre-order Ned's next book, again, called What Do You Say? You can get all this stuff, but I have my notes because I love this book. And Chapter 4, The Non-Anxious Presence, gives all sorts of suggestions for how to get yourself in a place where you can be that consultant and you don't serve them, if you will, this trickle-down anxiety. And there's some really beautiful ideas, like you just said, to just really appreciate your kid and love them, right now for who they are and where they are with this. I love this idea. Write your teen a short letter summarizing your concerns, and then promise them you won't bring it up for a month, and let them sit with it and see what it is. I mean, it's always a challenge. And so, gosh, all this stuff is so good. So what if you spoke about kind of letting them make their own decisions? There's a student with dyslexia who doesn't care about his grades, and the parent says, I actually kind of admire that. I mean, that is a really individual path to take in our very success-oriented culture. But she says, but I know that colleges are obviously going to look at grades, and do I just accept the way he's thinking about this right now?
Well, so here's the thing. One of the things we talk about in the book is what's called motivational interviewing. Because in that situation, I imagine that the mom is, she's sort of a little bit torn, right? Wants to support what may be a more healthy and balanced perspective about school and grades in college, and rather than feeding into what kind of feels like this mania. On the flip side, you certainly want your son, and we want all of our kids, to work hard at school, not to be obsessed with grades, but to take school, to work hard at developing themselves, because we want to learn how to write well, to be able to express our thoughts clearly, right? We want to learn, foreign language or math, because we probably want to know at least some math in the real world. And working hard at things is good for our development. Working hard at anything is, and again, this can be school, this can also be, things outside of school. But we have a whole chapter about motivation and the language of change. And one of the things that I think is really helpful is this idea of what is called motivational interviewing. And motivational interviewing started with students of Carl Rogers, who worked with alcoholics. And classically, what happened, people who worked with alcoholics would say, look, if you don't change this, you're going to ruin your liver, you're going to lose your job, your health, your spouse, your money, da da da. As though those things were going to talk people into changing their behavior, and they just got more stuck. And motivational interviewing was really looking for ways for kind of change talk, and this idea that people are ambivalent about change. And so I was just talking with a parent earlier on, who might be the opposite end of the spectrum is this mom's kid, who's obsessively driven about grades and thinks she has to get 100 on everything. And if you don't go to good college, you'll never have a good life, which is also quite problematic, right? And I said, it seems to me that kids are pretty good at giving parents these, what I think of as kind of emotional grenades, right? And they're asking you to sort of solve it one way or the other. Where, if you say, well, sweetheart, no, I mean, college is really important. You need these grades, right? They're going to argue the other way. But if you say, well, grades don't matter at all and school doesn't matter, well, that's not true either. And it's the idea that most of us are ambivalent. And so your son, I'm sure, would feel better if, I'm just making this up, he's a BC student. I'm sure that it's not lost on him that he would be happier and feel better about his time spent in school if you're an AB student, right? But he also knows that it takes a lot of work to move a grade from a C to a B. He might work really hard and still come up short. And that may feel even worse than kind of doing a half-hearted effort, right? Mm-hmm. And so one of the things with this ambivalence is that we recognize this. And when you have kids share things like that, what people describe as reflective listening, and you just kind of repeat back to them what you heard. So your understanding is that grades don't really matter too much for school, and where you go to college doesn't matter at all. Do I have that about right? And maybe says, well, yeah, that's right. You say, well, sounds like there's some logic to that. And you say nothing more than that, because when we start trying to put the case on why you need to work harder, he will argue the reasons why it's so difficult. Right? So this kid who thinks she needs to get perfect grades says something like, well, sounds like you think you need to have a perfect grade on things. That must be pretty hard to feel like you have to be perfect all the time, right? And so with this, what we're really trying to do is, what I'm convinced the kids roll these things out at us and give us the problem, and they're trying to see our reaction. And I think we can hear it and reflect back. What it's really going to do is open up a conversation where the harder stuff is going to come out. Because I don't know your son, but I can imagine that he is saying grades don't matter and school doesn't matter, because that's a little bit of self-protection. It may be the case, and I don't know, but it may be the case that he's actually a little frustrated with himself. He's doubting his own abilities. It stings a little bit that some of his friends get better grades, but it's a really hard thing to come out to parents and say, my grades are lousy and I feel like I'm a dope because my friends get better grades. That's kind of scary. Where if you say back, so it sounds to me like, your grades are, they're so-so, and you feel like you're about okay where you are. This tends to open the door, and we get a little bit more intimate, because how we respond to those initial questions is really how we signal to people that we can handle things that are a little bit more intense.
Wow. Yeah. So much to think about. And don't forget, folks, in the comments is the link to try to win a session with Ned and his co-author. There we go. But you can speak to them and ask them your questions directly. And for those who are watching, again, my folks with the learning disabilities and ADHD and autism spectrum disorder. Here we go. I'm so bad at this again. Chapter 11. Directly addressed. So some of what
Can I make one quick point really quickly? Because I'm glad you mentioned that chapter. There's a wonderful researcher named Adele Diamond. Okay. And she's an expert, a researcher on executive functions, which I know if you have kids who have any part of that soup of challenges, or maybe all of them, executive functions, including the ability to put things in perspective, can be a little wobbly, right? And she has what I think I love this insight. She says, I won't get it word for word, but it's something like, if you're sad or lonely or tired or stressed or in poor physical health, that your executive functions will be impacted first and impacted most. And so this is why the first couple chapters in our book are all about connection and empathy and validation and reflective listening. Because if you have kids who struggle with inattention, if you have kids who are struggle with the impacts of autism with learning disabilities, on and on and on, they just have more headwinds. They have more hurdles to get over than the rest of us. But it also means that their baseline level of stress or the reactivity may be higher. And when that happens, those executive functions, whatever allotment they've gotten, kind of goes sideways. And so, because we want kids to have the full, cognitive abilities available to them, including the executive function of emotional, mental flexibility, of putting things in perspective, it's so often the energy. Logic doesn't calm hard emotions. Feeling understood calms hard emotions. And when we do that, and we can help kids feel validated and listened to, and it brings those executive functions back online, they're more likely to be able to put things in perspective in the way that we would hope, where if we tried to tell them how they should look at it, it blows up in our face because they feel like we don't understand where they're coming from.
Yeah, and I think kids do very often feel like we're not listening. We're just telling them, and that's a challenge. Yeah, so first of all, for those, I can't remember now, my brain is just full of things, as these conversations always do. So emotional regulation, I saw, if you are not a subscriber to Attitude, I'll put that in here. It's attitude.mag, I think, .com. Follow them. I may not have this link right, but they do free webinars all the time, and either one just happened or is coming with Russell Barkley, the ADHD expert, and he is really on this emotional regulation piece, and he is so brilliant. And so if you can't find it, you can message me and I'll see if I can dig it. Again, I can never remember if it just happened or it's about to happen. But yeah, I think, what you were talking about too, of all this stuff, the consultant piece. Speaking of consultants and seeking help, I have been interviewing disability services directors for the revision of my book. And I ask them, what do they see in students who are successful at college, and the mirror image of that? What do you see in students who are not successful? And almost without fail, they have said students who seek help are the ones who are successful,
right,
and use the resources that are available to them, and the ones who aren't don't. And so I think part of it is letting students know that help is available because people need it. And maybe and it's a challenge here. I see some questions. I have a student who a perfectionist who won't admit to the need for support. And then, sorry, these are flicking in front of me. Lacks executive functioning skills and would benefit from some coaching. So I think there is also a line between making sure students have support they need to learn the skills that they need, and also providing so much support. As you said, I love what you said about seeking out support. If they never have to struggle, if there's somebody there every moment, then they never develop those help-seeking skills.
Yeah. My wife went at the school that she taught. Is a school called St. Andrew's School here in Potomac, Maryland, that has a wonderful, wonderful group. It's the Center for Transformative Teaching and Learning. A guy named Glenn Whitman who wrote a book called NeuroTeach. It's a wonderful book. It's kind of everything he got to basically say, what do we know about teaching and learning, and then apply it to a high school setting and like his own lab. It's really wonderful. But they had a mantra there that we don't pursue and rescue. We don't pursue and rescue. We give, and as parents, we do the same thing. We let kids know we're here to help. Anyway, my office hours are from 6 to 8, right? And if you let me know the day ahead, I'll be happy to look at any paper, blah blah blah. But we want kids to do a little bit of work rather than our being, do you need this, do you need this? Because part of being successful is recognizing the need for help. And, well, I don't know how to do that. golly, who knows the answer to that? Where can I go find the help that I need? That's an incredibly valuable life skill. I mean, I run a small company, and there are all kinds of things that I'm like, okay, who's going to help me on this? Because I don't know, or at least I don't know as well as other people do. To the kid who's perfectionistic, I mean, this we talk about this in the book because it's such it goes along with increasing anxiety that we see in the
Sure.
today.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
And we talk about the difference between having really high goals for yourself and high expectations versus perfectionistic thinking, right? Which is really born out of fear of falling short rather than excitement
Mm-hmm.
of
Mm-hmm.
being high. And the you can't talk people out of perfectionism. It's pretty darn hard. Because if I'm stressed enough about something, you start trying to, you're really not engaging the rational part of my brain. But
I like what you said about logic doesn't calm.
right? I mean, if I'm really upset and you're like, Ned, just listen, the amygdala, the threat detecting part of my brain is screaming in my head, don't listen to her. Effectively, you'll end up dead. She doesn't know what she's talking about. And it's how stress responses work. But two things with perfectionism. One, and this isn't at all to sort of point a finger at parents, but sometimes kids have parents who are just so gosh darn good at everything that they think,
Calm in this house.
they see how competent you are at everything that you do, but they don't know that you were an awkward seventh grader and that you goofed up this and goofed up that. They don't know. And so it can be helpful to model imperfection, look for opportunities to screw things up, try to play video games with your kid. That'll be a great way to show that you're far from perfect, right? Look for things where even if you're kind of fudging it a little bit, where you ask them for help, right? And so you're just modeling that, and you don't have to say a word about it. Don't make a big lesson out of it, but they'll see it. The other thing is when you have kids who are perfectionistic, we go back to that same writing reflex. We want to talk kids out of this. Two things come to mind. One, if a kid's really upset about something, he can say something like, gosh, it must be awfully hard to feel like you have to be perfect all the time, right? And again, not in a, you must be, if you would only change this, but to say, gosh, it must be really hard that way. And a perfect, like, Dad, you have no idea. I mean, everyone gets perfect grades and things, and I just can't seem to, and I do everything I can to say, and you're trying to get to that emotional component of it. The other thing is, it's for me when it's when my kids are having a hard time, and I do everything I can, to be empathetic, to use reflective listening, to not give solutions, that every once in a while I'll ask, that sounds like something that's really hard. This is how I first got my daughter with a therapist. He said, that sounds like you're really having a hard time. And goodness knows, I wish that I could solve that for you, but I'm not a therapist. And even if I were, I can't be a therapist and dad. And since no one else is going to be dad, I'm going to stay in my lane. But there are people who are really good, who know a lot about this kind of stuff. If you wanted to, I can find someone who can talk about some of this stuff if you want some help. Is that something you'd be interested in? And you ask in a way, in my experience, I ask in a way that's as light as possible. Rather, this is something you need to do or something you should do, which excites their stress response. But if this is something you wanted to do, and look for those opportunities, because when we're looking for kids to feel listened and heard and hugged, right, and they let their guards down a little bit, and that's oftentimes when they might kind of waver a little bit and say, okay, yeah, I can talk to someone who can make me be maybe, or would you like to be a little bit less? Would you like to feel like the demands on yourself weren't quite as high as they are? Like you didn't have to be perfect all the time. Would that be something you like? And if they say no, you go, okay, well, that's fine too. But we talk in the first couple chapters about how, as much as we can, we just want to get buy-in. Because if we don't, I mean, all of us have had the experience of having really terrific advice for our kids or our spouse or our colleagues, mom, dad, whatever, and they resist what's in their own best interest. So much of change in this energy is trying to get buy-in, so the wisdom and love that we have for our kids, that they can actually hear it and benefit from it.
Well, and I think that, some of the challenge sometimes, especially I think when students are older and they have learning disabilities or ADHD, is sometimes they do still need to learn those skills, and you can introduce the executive functioning coaches. And I have parents, who say that, I set him up with a coach, he won't
Mhm.
engage, he misses the appointment. And I know in this chapter, you and Bill talked too about how much you may not be able to do everything all at once. So, if the student is really resistant to you are doing the best you can as a parent to offer them all the services. And if they're receptive to it, it's one thing. But
Right,
if you're
right.
resisting, really sort of, pick your battles with this, because I think to bring it back to that sense of control, which is so much, what you talk about in here.
Well, there's a story in the book. Bill was, so Bill, I should say, is a clinical neuropsychologist, right? So he spent 35 years working. He's kind of like go-to guy in DC for kids with, complicated learning disabilities, autism, emotional problems, behavior problems. I mean, he's as good as they get. And he was doing a consultation with a kid who was seventh grade at I think, private Catholic school someplace. And the learning specialist was saying, look, it takes a learning specialist and 2 tutors and mom, both parents to get the kid to do anything. And Bill said, you should stop immediately.
Mm-hmm.
Stop immediately.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're giving the kid the lesson that you're only going to be successful because of our help, right? And Bill's point is, which is more important, getting through this grade or this class or this test, or have an accurate model of reality, right? Of who's, the kind of defining question is, whose problem is it? Whose problem is it? And Bill says so eloquently. Wow, though, it's hard for me to say that word. That if the adults around a kid are spending 80 units of energy to get a kid to do something, the kid will spend 20. And when the parents get more stressed or the teachers get more stressed and more intense, and they go to 90, the kid goes to 10. And it never changes until the energy changes.
Yeah.
I'm in the I'm in the middle of working with a kid right now who is very high profile parent, and I won't give any more details than that. And he is wildly ADHD. He's probably on the autism spectrum as well. And mom is as bright as they come, and she's so controlling in ways that are really problematic. And so we're doing this test prep for the ACT, and all that I did, I swear, I mean, I might have taught him a little bit, but all that I was trying to do was to have him take ownership of this, because as wildly ADHD as he is, I knew that if he did his best and paid attention, he could get a really good score. And if he didn't, it'd be like, filling in random bubbles. And so everything that I did was walking the walk and talking the talk of what's in the self-driven child. And the kid got a score that was higher than even I could dream to get. And his mom was like, how did that happen? And I'm like, well, we'll call him Doug. The right Doug showed up, right?
Yeah.
The right one showed up. And and I say this understanding full well that I have kids who are complicated, but not as complicated as a lot of the folks who are listening to this. And it is also the case that, as parents, we feel like we're judged by the success of our kids. And that's, and that's hard too. And so I don't want to make light of the love and concern you have for your kids, and how they're going to be able to get through life, be successful going through school and going through life. But goodness knows, I mean, having kids realize that this is their life, and they'll get out of it what they put into it. And I'm here to help you in any way I can, from holding your hand to proofreading your paper. I'll do it. But if I work harder than you do, I don't strengthen you, I weaken you.
I was reading some research today on self-efficacy, and I think that that's so important. And so if you've not heard of it, it's sort of the idea that if you believe that you can do well, you will do the things that make you successful. And if you don't believe that you're capable, you will not do the things that, and I'm obviously greatly oversimplifying and probably botching this, but I do think that when it comes, there is sort of like that sweet spot of support, and it's hard to know where that is. But I love what you said, or what Bill said about, if the adults were doing 80 and the kid was doing 20, and then the adults went to 90 and he went down to 10. If they are not, engaging with it, then what is happening? And I think as you see, my thing too is as they're going to college, because that's part of my whole thing is I worry about their confidence level. So if they've always had support and they've come home every day and somebody has said, okay, what does your assignment notebook say? And where's your stuff? And let's make sure you do this, that they are going to worry that when they go, they will not have the skills. And so the best way to find out, I think you said it, and I'm paraphrasing, but like, let's see where we are. What do we have here? If we take this, who's really doing the work? What can you do?
My wife, I mean, two things. One is that, it's better to get a C that you feel that you earned than an A that you don't know you can do. You fear that you can't replicate yourself.
I think
right?
that's well put.
And, I mean, I got through. I was at the top of my class when I was in high school, and when I got to college, all the stuff that maybe hadn't been attended to as well. And college for me, I got grades that were disappointing. Right? I mean, I'm just genetically a little bit brighter than average, and so I knew that I could do pretty well because learning for me is a little bit easier than it might be for some other people. But my grades were, but they were my grades. They were my grades, and. Am I thrilled? But the GP, no. But I also know at this point in my life, I feel like I can take on pretty much anything because of the stuff that I've gotten through. And, I was lucky to have helpful adults when I really needed them. But I also didn't have the experience of people trying to do things for me, partly because I'm old, that it wasn't as much a thing, a few decades ago. But I'll also share my wife, who's a really good student and a really good academic, much more educated than am I. She tells the story that when her mom was driving across country to go to college where we both attended, my wife maintains, and my mother-in-law denies it, but she turned to my wife and said, I don't know how you're going to get through college without me. And it was her mom was really involved and super lovely mom and really helpful. But oh my goodness. Stay in your lane, lady. And what a disempowering message. You're just about to start college and you're not going to make it without me. And it's just her mom's fretful. Her mom's lovely, but she's fretful. And I think she was really just verbalizing her own anxiety that I'm not going to, if you need help, I'm not there to help you. And that's hard for any parent, right? But goodness, if I got hit by a truck coming home from work tomorrow, and that's the end of dad, I sure as heck want my kids to be upset for a few days. But then I also want to say, you know what? My life goes on. It has to. It has to, right? Otherwise, I've not done my job.
Fair enough. Fair enough. We're coming to the end of the hour. I do want to read this quote that I love from this book, among so many, it's hard to choose. But, we've talked about perfectionism and, certainly the culture in which many of our kids are growing up is, everybody is a standout, right? Everybody's an athlete and a great student and an artist, and they all feel like they, if they're not at the top, then they're losers. And you said that of both the obsessively driven and the undermotivated. Both ends of that spectrum still have the same concern.
Yep. And I think Bill has one of the best lines in this. So again, he spends all of his time working with kids who, for most of whom learning is hard. And he tends to say things like, I've gone through all the tests and I've looked at your stuff, and you're smart enough. You're smart enough to contribute to this world. You're smart enough to do really cool things, because part of it in this perceived scarcity about college and academic success.
Perceived scarcity, yes.
What I think kids are really worried about is there a place for me in this world?
I think that's right.
Is there a place for me? And if you say, look, you're smart enough, and I'm smart enough to do the work that I do, but heaven knows, I'm glad that I'm not the guy who designed the plane that I fly on or the medications that my kid eats. I don't have those skills, and I love the work you probably have talked at some point about Howard Gardner and frames of minds, and they do multiple intelligences, right? And it's simply nobody gets everything. Nobody gets everything. And so, as Sir Ken Robinson with The Element, if you can pay attention to what are you better at than most people, you don't have to be the best. I'm not the best at anything. I'm not the best at being me. I mean, I'm not the best at anything, right? But there are a few things that I'm better at than most people are. Now, I'm not even sure I'm 99th percentile on anything, but there's some things I'm better than most people that I also like to do. And that's what I've wrapped my life around, right? And everybody has things that they're better at. That, even if you're 51st percentile, right? Okay, great, you're better than most people, and go and work hard at those things. In a perfect world, there are also things that you like to do.
Mhm.
Ideally, that aligns with school, but that might be, talking with people. That might be small engine repair. It might be just making the world beautiful by the art that you do. And so I really like that idea of you have enough, you're smart enough to do something cool with the world, because it takes the pressure off. If I somehow have to prove that I'm smarter, no, you're good where you are. But keep working hard at developing the skills and abilities for things that matter to you and how you want to contribute to this world.
I love that. And actually dovetails nicely with another quote that I love from this book, which is being a straight A student, almost by definition, requires a high level of conformity, which is not the route to a high level of success. I mean, that's some deep stuff to lay on a teenager. I like that idea.
Well, yeah, I mean, if people know the work of Mel Levine, who really, but he had a
Sure.
very difficult ending to his life, but really one of the great, great educators who really understood kids with learning differences. And he had a line in there that said, it's a blessing to figure out early on in life what it is you suck at, right? Because in many ways, people who are successful in life, but to be a valedictorian, you're kind of equally good at everything, right? But that's not what people do in the real world, right? We don't try to be great at the things that we find dull or a waste of time, or that we think, God, this is the most painful thing in the world. We let things go one by one, and then we start to specialize a little bit more, a little bit more and more on the things that we do. And I just think it's a more accurate model of reality, and we might as well just tell. Of course, are there advantages to being the top of your high school class, going to Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford? Obviously, there are great advantages to going to those elite schools, but so much of mental health is changing thinking from I have to I want to. If you want to go to Princeton, 4 years of Orange, rock on, you do you. But the idea that you have to go to a highly selective college to have a successful life, it's just remarkably untrue, and the science and the statistics support it. And we're just trying to change thinking from I have to I want to.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I never asked where you went to college. You never asked where I went to college, right? I know you're good at what you do, right? People want your help. You help people, right? Right? And would it have made a difference? I mean, give me a break. Give me a break.
Yeah. Yeah.
4 years of developing yourself as a person. That's, for me, that's the way to think about college. And so you pick the place. Where's the place where I'm going to be able to develop me, as opposed to getting the stamp of approval? That's no.
I love it. I love it.
Says the test prep guy.
Say again?
Says the test prep guy. I'm talking to myself.
We're going to just let that slide.
Right.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your insights. Don't forget to order Ned's book. It comes out next Tuesday. Show it to us one more time. Excellent. What do you say? Don't forget again to register for your chance to win a consult with him and with Dr. Stixred. Thank you so much for your time and your thoughts today. I enjoy your work so much, and I look forward to the next one. And I see one of our viewers has ordered it, pre-ordered it in June. So everybody else, get on, order it through your local independent bookstore. They can get it for you. So let's do all of this.
Well, thanks for that. And I'll say that the whole purpose of the book is simply that as parents, we love our kids, we have advice, we have wisdom. And it's so hard when we have great things to say and we're not effective. And all this is about is the science and our combined 70 years of experience talking with kids one-on-one on how to simply be more effective in getting across the messages we want to get across.
Yeah, I think it's hard, and we could all use some help with it for sure. Thank you so much, Ned.
Thanks, Elizabeth. It's great to be with you.
Good night.
Good night.